All right, thank you for joining me. The House GOP held a retreat Monday at Donald Trump's Doral Hotel. Wow, what are the odds, of all the places in the United States that the GOP could hold their retreat, they picked Trump's Doral Hotel in Miami. What a coincidence that Donald Trump just happens to own the place. Donald Trump spoke before his army of House supplicants and asked if he can run again in 2028. He said, I've raised a lot of money for the next race that I assume I can't use for myself, but I'm not 100% sure because I don't know, because you've never read the Constitution, you moron. He goes on to say, I think I'm not allowed to run again. I'm not sure. Am I allowed to run again? And then he turned to Mike Johnson. Mike, am I allowed to run again? And Mike Johnson, who carries his jock, laughed nervously. New aggregate polling of seven polls shows 43% of Americans disapprove of Donald Trump. 538 reports this is the lowest disapproval rating for a new president since World War II. Actually, there's an exception. Donald Trump's 41.4 disapproval rating his first term. This is not a mandate. He's delusional. Trump received 6,285,000 fewer popular votes in 2024 than Joe Biden did in 2020. Trump only got 6 more electoral votes than Joe Biden got in 2020. This is far from a mandate. He beat Kamala Harris by a handful of votes. Yet this week, Donald Trump effectively shut down the National Labor Relations Board. Gwen Wilcox, Biden's NLRB chair, was fired by Trump. Her term was supposed to expire in August of 2028. Now, she was no longer the chair. Trump appointed a new chair. That's what presidents get to do. But she was still on the NLRB. Trump fired her, and now we're left with 2 members sitting on the National Labor Relations Board. They can't meet. He's effectively shut down the NLRB. According to the Supreme Court, you need 3 members of the NLRB. There are only 2 left. You're looking at a picture of the NLRB board back in December. There's Chairman Marvin Kaplan. He's the new chair. He's a Republican. And there's David Prouty. His term expires in August. You'll also see Lauren McFerrin. She left in December of last year. And on the far right is Gwen Wilcox, who Trump fired. So there are only 2 people left on the NLRB. They can't meet. He's pretty much shut it down. The National Labor Relations Board was set up to monitor union elections. You can't have unionization without the NLRB. They enforce union law. They're the ones who bring Starbucks and Amazon to the negotiating table. As of right now, we do not have a National Labor Relations Board. Jocelyn Samuels, a commissioner on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, announced that Trump fired her in direct violation of the law. He's got to keep Democrats on the EEOC. He fired her. Trump issued a memo announcing a 90-day freeze on all federal grants and assistance. It blocks $3 trillion of federal funding from being dispersed for 90 days. Why? Why is he doing that? Matthew Vaith is the acting director of the Office of Management and Budget, and he explained the freeze in a memo, writing, quote, "This action is necessary because the use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity transgenderism and Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve the day-to-day lives of those we serve. Tuesday night, a federal judge issued a stay on the spending freeze. That stay lasts until next Monday. This, right after an emergency lawsuit was filed by Diane Yentl, president of the National Council of Nonprofits. You might remember she was played by Barbara Streisand. 23 state attorneys general, led by California Attorney General Rob Bonta and New York Attorney General Letitia James, also sued the Trump administration over the spending freeze, asking for a restraining order to block it from going into effect. In their filing, the state attorneys general said the freeze is not only unconstitutional, it violates the Administrative Procedure Act. The Administrative Procedure Act was passed in 1946. It forbids agencies like the Office of Management and Budget to act unilaterally without congressional and judicial oversight. Meals on Wheels gets much of its funding from federal grants. The Huffington Post reporting that the head of Meals on Wheels no longer sure if they can serve hot meals to seniors if this spending freeze is restored next week. House Republican Rich McCormick of Georgia appeared on CNN Tuesday, asked if he supports eliminating school lunch for vulnerable kids. Republican Congressman Rich McCormick of Georgia said, quote, "School lunches allow children to sponge off the government," unquote. He then suggested children from poor families should go to work instead of relying on free school lunches. Republican Congressman Rich McCormick of Georgia added, quote, "I worked since I was, before I was even 13 years old." Yeah, well, maybe, Rich McCormick, if you worked less and studied more, you wouldn't be so stupid. This is what happens when you send kids off to work before the age of 13. They end up stupid, like Rich McCormick, congressman from Georgia. In Trump's new memo announcing the freeze, he said he planned to cut off funding for sanctuary cities harboring undocumented immigrants. Before that judge issued a 7-day stay on Trump's freeze, the White House Office of Management and Budget insisted food stamps, Social Security, and Medicaid would be exempt from the 90-day funding freeze. As that statement was being made, Medicaid portals went down across the country in all 50 states. Local government agencies couldn't access the Department of Health and Human Services administrative site for reimbursing doctors and hospitals for low-income residents. I noticed a lot of people are worried about Medicare, but it's Medicaid that froze. Medicaid froze on Tuesday, not Medicare. Massachusetts House Democrat Richard Neal said, quote, "My office has heard from community health centers across Massachusetts that are unable to access their payment management system over at Health and Human Services. This is how they get paid by the federal government. That's 2 million people in Massachusetts whose health insurance is at risk. Medicaid covers low-income Americans. Medicare covers people over the age of 65. Medicare is administered by the federal government. Medicaid is administered through block grants made to the 50 individual states, and they get reimbursed by going to the Medicaid portal, which was shut down on Tuesday. Oregon Senator Democrat Ron Wyden said, quote, "This is a blatant attempt to rip away health insurance from millions of Americans overnight and will get people killed," unquote. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pointed out that 41% of all births here in the United States are covered by Medicaid. Isn't that interesting? They want you to keep the baby. They just don't want to help you with it afterwards. House Democrat Maxwell Frost from Florida confirmed on Tuesday that the Medicaid portal was shut down in his home state of Florida. And one could question how politically savvy this is going to be for Republicans, considering that nearly 4 million Floridians are on Medicaid. Now they're going to pay attention. They didn't like Kamala Harris's vibe, so they stayed home on November 5th. Now the Republicans, in less than 2 weeks, have shown you who they are again. Somebody said to me, I can't follow politics for my own self-preservation. Really? For your own self-preservation? 4 million Floridians are losing their Medicaid. How's your self-preservation working out? During her very first press conference, White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt insisted the Medicaid portals were down due to an outage. You know, you can always tell. Let me show you this. Let me go big here. Can I? I don't think I can. I can't. Well, you could. I should be able to. What's going on here? Sorry, Oh, here we go. Let's get organized here. You can always tell when White House press spokeswoman, you can always tell when White House press spokesman Caroline Leavitt is lying. The cross around her neck starts growing. That's how you can tell she's lying. Could that cross get any bigger? Yes, when she starts telling more lies. We get it. You're a Christian. If you have to wear a cross that big, you're not a Christian. All right. When House Democrat Maxwell Frost was told the Medicaid portal was down due to an outage, he said, bullshit. He went on to say the public backlash is just too much to handle. He said, quote, some might be asking if the Trump administration is either a bunch of liars or incompetents. They are, he said, both. The portal was restored later in the day, but now people are complaining it no longer works properly. This memo freezing federal funds was issued by Trump's acting director of the Office of Management and Budget. Now, Russell Vought is Trump's nominee for Office of Management and Budget. He has yet to be confirmed by the Senate. And his hearings were last week, during which he testified that he believed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is unconstitutional. The Impoundment Control Act, that prevents presidents from impounding funds, means holding on to funds that were allocated by Congress and not spending it. It was passed during the height of Watergate. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974 guarantees that the president can't impound, hold on to, impound, like put in jail, can't impound funds earmarked by Congress. In other words, after a budget is passed into law, the President of the United States is forbidden from directing his federal agencies not to spend money Congress has already allocated by law in the budget. This was in order. This was what Nixon and Ehrlichman were trying to do to rein in spending. They impounded certain funds, especially those earmarked for environmental regulation. Ehrlichman ended up going to prison. Nixon would have gone to prison, but for Gerald Ford's pardon. So, the Impoundment Act, the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, prevents presidents from saying, I'm not going to spend this money. But presidents, Democrat and Republican, wanted that power, not to spend what they often call the pork inside these massive budgets. That's why Congress passed and why Bill Clinton signed into law the Line Item Veto Act of 1996. A line item veto is pretty much impounding funds, and it is what Ronald Reagan begged for. He wanted the ability to go over the federal budget after it had been passed by Congress and take a magic marker and go, nope, not allowing money for this, not allowing money for that. That's the line item veto. It allows a president to act unilaterally, taking Congress out of the budgetary process once a budget has been signed into law. So for 2 years, Clinton used his line item veto 82 times on 2 budgets. This was all part of the Gingrich Revolution, right? But then in 1998, our Supreme Court ruled the line item veto is unconstitutional. The court said a line item veto violates the presentment clause in our Constitution. Article 1, Section 7, Clauses 2 and 3 of the Constitution state that when a president is presented, this is the presentment clause, when he is presented with a congressional bill to sign, he has but 2 choices: veto it or sign it, period. He can't suddenly root around inside the bill or the budget and say, I'm going to obey this part of this new bill, but I'm going to ignore this one. One other tool at a president's disposal, if he wants to circumvent Congress, is something called a signing statement. I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about signing statements. Right before a president signs a bill into law, often he or she will outline which parts of that bill he or she will order his agencies to enforce and which ones he will not. A signing statement is the president saying, I have prosecutorial discretion. I will enforce this part of the bill, but I won't enforce that one, and he goes on to sign it. Obviously, there is nothing in the Constitution that allows signing statements, and there has been a back and forth in the lower courts as to whether signing statements are constitutional. The Supreme Court has yet to take a case to decide on the constitutionality of signing statements. And I suspect Donald Trump will test the constitutionality of signing statements, especially when Republicans regain the Senate and the House in 2 years, override his vetoes. He'll resort to signing statements, and that will be something in about 3 years we'll be testing in the Supreme Court. Senator Bernie Sanders warned that Trump's freezing of federal grants is illegal and, if upheld by the courts, would be devastating for millions of Americans. Bernie called Trump's freeze unconstitutional and then reminded Trump the power of the purse resides in Congress, something Speaker Mike Johnson, that spineless toady, might want to keep in mind. Bernie called Trump's attempt to choke off funding for much-needed programs. He called it a dangerous move towards authoritarianism. Bernie Sanders added, Trump is not a king. Bernie should have been the Democratic nominee in 2000. That's how you fight fascism, with a real populist. Democrat Patty Murray is the ranking member on the Senate Appropriations Committee. They approve budgets as well as hold confirmation hearings on the nomination of Director of the Office of Management and Budget. That's the office that tried to implement the 90-day freeze before the judge on Tuesday issued a stay. Senator Murray responded to Trump's freeze by calling for a delay in the hearings for Trump's new budget chief. The vote on Trump's budget chief. They already had the hearings. I mentioned him earlier. He's Russell Vought. He should be called Devout. Very dangerous man. He's Trump's pick for Office of Management and Budget. Vought played a major role in formulating Project 2025, which Donald Trump insisted throughout the campaign he knew nothing about. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman, coming to you from New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. I'm doing this at an earlier time for my own mental health, which is in short supply during the past 10 days. So to keep my sanity, I'm trying to get on a healthier schedule. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. It's harder to find my show these days for obvious reasons. So this is an audio podcast. You can find The David Feldman Show wherever you get your podcasts. And you have to work harder to find this show. So please subscribe to my newsletter. I'm on Blue Sky. Some people can't find me on Blue Sky. You can either find me as David Feldman or maybe The Mop-Up. My handle on Blue Sky is The Mop-Up. I need you to not abandon me right now. So please subscribe to my channel. Share this episode. That helps with the algorithm and liking it. And brush your teeth and comb your hair. And don't wash your socks and underwear in my kitchen sink if you're a house guest. Please. I think I've told you everything you're supposed to do. The CDC, that's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has been ordered by the Trump administration to stop working with the World Health Organization. You know, one would think, considering Trump's response to COVID was the worst, statistically, the worst in the industrialized world. Most deaths, total and most deaths per capita here in the United States from COVID because of Donald Trump. So one would think he might exercise, when it comes to our health, a little restraint or perhaps humility, since 1 million Americans died from COVID because of him. Just a little humility, but not Donald Trump. One of his first acts coming back to the White House was signing an executive order pulling our country out of the World Health Organization. Established in 1948, the World Health Organization was set up by the United Nations to coordinate responses to public health crises, you know, like worldwide pandemics. 194 countries were members of the World Health Organization. Now it's down to 193 because Trump pulled us out. This is the Republican Party's hyper-individualism writ large. They believe not only people, but nations have to go it alone. We have to go it alone. Well, humans survive through community and cooperation. That's why solitary confinement is torture. Humans, and I don't think there are any left in the Republican Party, but humans are communal animals. We die without others. Hell is loneliness. And now we're out of the World Health Organization. We're in hell. We're in hell. He's taking us to hell. Caroline Kennedy is the daughter of President John F. Kennedy. I was supposed to marry Caroline Kennedy. I usually don't talk about this, but it's personal. But I was going to propose to her. Problem was we never met. But my parents insisted she was going to be my wife, Caroline Kennedy. I usually don't talk about my personal life, but I thought I'd share that. She is also cousin to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Trump's pick to head the Department of Health and Human Services. They're the ones who manage Medicare and Medicaid. Bobby Kennedy Jr., he's the one you want running the Medicaid portal, right? Yesterday, Caroline Kennedy issued a statement calling her cousin Bobby Kennedy Jr., quote unquote, a predator. She accused Bobby Kennedy Jr. of preying on sick children and members of his own family. She didn't go into specifics on his predatory behavior when it comes to members of his own family. That's a freighted word when it comes to family members. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation hearings are scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday of this week. Alcoholic and Christian white nationalist Pete Hegseth was confirmed by the Senate to be our nation's defense chief. The Wall Street Journal has a story out revealing the dishonesty and cowardice of North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis, who is one of the last remaining moderates. He's one of the last remaining Republican good guys, and apparently North Carolina Republican Senator Tom Tillis, according to the Wall Street Journal, apparently he threw Pete Hegseth's sister-in-law under the bus last week, according to the Wall Street Journal. Tom Tillis, the Republican senator, urged Danielle Hegseth, that would be Pete Hegseth's former sister-in-law, Senator Tillis urged her to sign a sworn affidavit recounting Pete Hegseth's questionable behavior involving domestic violence, alcoholism, racism, misogyny, and visits to strip clubs in uniform. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina repeatedly and reportedly assured this woman that it only took 4 Republican votes to sink Hegseth's nomination, and he told Danielle Hegseth, I'm going to be one of the 4 who votes against Hegseth if you sign this affidavit. After Tom Tillis gave her his word in front of 3 other people, according to the Wall Street Journal, he gave her his word. Danielle Hegseth signed the affidavit. And last Friday, Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina voted to confirm Pete Hegseth to run our Defense Department. Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, and Mitch McConnell voted against Hegseth. That was 3. That's a tie. That meant J.D. Vance, the vice president, had to be brought in to break that tie. But had Tom Tillis kept his promise to Danielle Hegseth, the Hegseth nomination would have been killed. The Houston Chronicle reporting that one of the January 6ers pardoned by Donald Trump has been arrested for soliciting a minor. Well, of course he has. Yesterday, one of the January 6ers pardoned by Donald Trump was shot to death by Indiana police after reportedly resisting arrest. And last week, a Florida man pardoned for the role he played on January 6 was arrested on a weapons charge. The Wall Street Journal reporting that former special counsel Jack Smith, who indicted Donald Trump for election interference and mishandling classified documents, has been forced to hire a lawyer as Trump's new Justice Department launches an investigation into Jack Smith's special counsel's office. They're prosecuting the prosecutors. Yesterday, the Justice Department launched an investigation into how 250 January 6ers were prosecuted by special counsel Jack Smith, who used an obstruction law that the Supreme Court last year ruled. They ruled that one of the statutes used to prosecute 250 January 6ers, the Supreme Court ruled it was inappropriate for Jack Smith to apply that statute to the January 6 defendants. It was a law passed anyway, it's too complicated. It involves really destroying accounting evidence, making it it's against the law for somebody to destroy documents that would help the government in the prosecution of financial fraud. And Jack Smith, used that in prosecuting the January 6ers on one of the counts, and it was thrown out. But most of those 250 January 6ers were prosecuted on other counts. But this is what the Justice Department under Trump is going to fixate on. Jack Smith deciding to use a statute that the Supreme Court ended up declaring was inappropriate, as though that's a scandal. Ed Martin, you're looking at this POS. He was named by Donald Trump to run the federal prosecutor's office, and he's going to be prosecuting Jack Smith. He wants to get to the bottom of why Jack Smith used that federal statute on 250 January 6ers. Oh, I can explain. He didn't know the Supreme Court wouldn't approve of it. That's why. Now you can shut down the case. ICE says it arrested 969 undocumented immigrants on Tuesday. On Monday, it arrested roughly 1,100 per day. During the final year of the Biden administration, ICE averaged 310 arrests per day. Caroline Leavitt, Trump's White House spokesperson, said of the ICE raids, quote, "Trump is focused on launching the largest mass deportation operation in American history of," she said, "illegal criminals." Illegal criminals. She's calling these people illegal criminals as opposed to legal criminals. You dolt. Speaking of dolts, Dr. Phil accompanied ICE agents on their Chicago raids and told reporters, quote, "These are known criminals and terrorists." He went on to say, "We're talking about murderers, child traffickers, child rapists. We're talking about bad actors." That's what he said. Okay? But NBC says half of the 1,200 arrested on Sunday had no criminal record, Dr. Phil. That's when you were accompanying ICE. Half of the 1,200 arrested on Sunday, Dr. Phil, had no criminal record. The rest, according to NBC News, were non-violent offenders. They were just in this country without documentation. And yet, Dr. Phil said they are terrorists, murderers, child traffickers, and child rapists. It's almost as though Dr. Phil is full of crap. Who would believe it? Dr. Phil and, of course, Donald Trump's White House press spokeswoman, Caroline Leavitt, on Tuesday called these undocumented immigrants who were arrested criminals. Criminals! You would think the White House press spokesperson would pay attention to language, would know what a criminal is. The Guardian reporting that being in the United States without documentation is not a crime. Therefore, these are not criminals. Please pay attention to this if you're a Republican. Being in the United States without the proper documents is a civil offense handled by our civil courts, not the criminal courts. That means, under law, violators, people who don't have documents, people in this country without documents, they are subject to civil penalties like deportation. Or the people who brought them here, for work, are fined for bringing them here by our civil courts, not the criminal courts, Nobody goes to prison for not having papers. Again, according to American law, according to the United States Criminal Code, being here without documentation is not a crime. These are not criminals. But why let facts, why let the law get in the way of enforcing the law? Now, if you have been deported for not having documentation, and then you return to this country after you've been deported, then that is a criminal misdemeanor. And so it goes from the civil courts to the criminal courts. Federal law says misdemeanors carry a maximum of 1 year in prison. All of the people being rounded up by ICE over the weekend were never deported, had no criminal record. They are not criminals. You have to be deported, and then you have to come back to the United States after you've been deported to be technically a criminal. CNN's Jim Acosta has quit after the executives at CNN cowed to pressure from the Trump administration and offered Jim Acosta the graveyard shift starting at midnight. Throughout the first Trump administration, Jim Acosta accosted Donald Trump and his administration incessantly. But there are reports. CNN is now telling reporters it's a clean slate with Trump. Give him a chance. During her very first press conference on Tuesday, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt refused to say whether the Trump White House in February will observe Black History Month. All she was willing to say was, quote, President Trump will continue to celebrate American history and the contributions that all Americans have made, regardless of race, religion, or creed. They're not going to celebrate Black History Month. Seems like that to me. White nationalist alcoholic Pete Hegseth, his first day on the job as defense secretary. Let me go large here. This is him before happy hour. Pete Hegseth, white Christian nationalist alcoholic, Pete Hegseth, his first day on the job as defense secretary referred to Fort Moore as Fort Benning and Fort Liberty by its former name of Fort Bragg. Fort Benning was originally named after Confederate General Henry Louis Benning, a Confederate general. Fort Bragg was originally named after Braxton Bragg, a Confederate general from North Carolina who, like Robert E. Lee, owned slaves. Congress, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, Congress in 2020 passed a law to rename Army bases that had been named after Confederate soldiers. Donald Trump in 2020 vetoed that bill, but Congress overrode the veto. But that's not good enough for white nationalist Pete Hegseth, who is now calling Fort Moore, Fort Benning. He's calling Fort Liberty, Fort Bragg. Gee, you think the Trump administration is going to observe Black History Month? And Google Maps is now calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and Mount Denali, Mount McKinley. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening to me. Please share this episode if you want to help. That's the best way. Please like this episode because it's good for the algorithm. Please, I read all your comments, so let me know if I made any mistakes. And thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for for keeping the conversation civil. I don't know what my schedule is, so you should hit the notifications bell if you want to find me. Please hit the notifications bell. It's getting harder to find shows like this, so please subscribe to my newsletter. I'm on Blue Sky, David Feldman, or the Mop Up. I wasn't planning to do a show, but then I woke up and read what was going on. So maybe I'll be doing a show tomorrow. I try to do 3 to 4 shows a week. Let's see what tomorrow brings. It's going to be okay. We're defining ourselves. Joe Biden accomplished more in his first 2 years than any president since FDR accomplished in 8 years. So this is just an opportunity for us to see who the Republicans really are. Briefly, we get, oh my God, they're freezing Medicaid. We're getting to see who these people really are. And once again, Americans will wake up for the midterms and we'll have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House and punish these people. We will punish these people legally. It's going to be okay, but you have to fight. And as my mother said, nobody likes a coward. Don't be a coward. Trump is the coward. Fight.